All right, good evening, and thank you for being here. I'm Sandy Graham, CEO of VASA Publishing and the publisher of The Gita Comes Alive. Tonight, we have the author of The Gita Comes Alive, Jeffrey Armstrong, who recently was awarded the Distinguished Indologist Award by the ICCR, which is the Indian Council of Cultural Relations. In addition, tonight's special guest is Nilesh NILKANTH Oak. Nilesh is the author of several controversial books, but in particular, he wrote the book, Why Did the Mahabharata War Happen?, where he freshly evaluated astronomical observations of the Mahabharata text. And his work has led to the validation of the 5561 BCE as the year of the Mahabharata. And as he did that, he falsified more than 120 alternate claims. We asked Nilesh Ji to write the foreword to the Bhagavad Gita Comes Alive as an endorsement for his work. And it's one of the reasons that we called this Gita a radical translation. There were other reasons as well, and you can read them in the front of the book. Tonight, Nilesh and Jeffrey will continue the discussion they started last week on chapter 18. I'd like to welcome everyone to episode 27 of season 3, and we'll start tonight with Jeffrey G.
Thank you so much, Sandy, and namaste to all of you. Pranams, and we're so pleased to have you with us participating in this darshan and in this satsang where we are in pursuit of a clear and vivid understanding of that which is always true. That's the sat. And sangha means all of us together, because each of us adds something to the energetic, and together all of that sincere listening energy creates a force and a space in which it's easier to actually hear who we truly are. It's a momentum, and we humans have this interesting ability to extend our energetic field, and when we all do that together, with the aim of just knowing what is always true, that's called a sat sangha, a gathering around what is always true. And before we begin officially, it is a protocol and a desired action to show gratitude to all of the rishis and gurus and acharyas and sages who came before us. So, Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo, Maheshwaraha, Guru Sakshad, Parabrahma, Tasmai, Shri Gurave Namaha. And for someone like myself who came in from the cold, who was born outside the purview of this amazing culture and its amazing vidya, then there's an extra amount of gratitude for being let in, as if what I look like and where I come from and where I've been matters for nothing. But what matters is my sincerity. So for this, my gurus accepted me, taught me, and in return for my sincerity and hunger, gave me the gifts that are the most amazing. Guru Brahma we did. Now we say, Omagana, Timirandasya, Ganangana Salakaya, Chakshur, Unmilitam, Genatasmai, Shri Gurave Namaha. I was blind and really could not see who I am, where we are, what is really going on, all of it. And my guru came and with the torchlight of Vedic knowledge forced open my eyes, at my request, of course. And now, from that, I can see the things that were not visible before. That's the darshan, and it's why we gather in the presence of the rishis, so that drishti, so that seeing what was otherwise not seen takes place. And the Bhagavad Gita is the singular user's manual, if there is one, for the Vedic civilization, given directly by Bhagavan himself to his friend and student Arjuna. And so as we go through the Bhagavad Gita, we're having direct association with Bhagavan, with Arjuna. And this was the intention of their Leela. Leela means this game that was put together so we would have this all these many years later. So this Leela of the avatar, the descent of the ultimate being, Bhagavan, Sri Bhagavan, and a plot in the background that was established so it would act as a context and give an immediacy to this knowledge. It being a battlefield, it being a conflict that could not be avoided, and even more true to form, an interfamilial conflict. But then aren't we humans all in one sense one family? So shouldn't we view all human conflicts as interfamilial? And shouldn't we empathize and feel when countries bomb each other and fight with one another? So it is in that context of disturbed and angry and battling relations that this conversation is taking place, so that the emotional content of it is different than just it being positioned as a war. It's interfamilial because we're all one family of beings, creatures, humans, everything that shows signs of life. And next, my own personal guru of Vedanta, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Praskatyade Satarine. Nilesh Oak will be joining us in a little while. He had something he had to do before. We'll see him come on in a while. And we're going to continue our conversation on the calculation of the astronomical antiquity of the Vedic knowledge and the use of that astronomical calculation for a kind of knowing that only a life-to-life culture participates in. There's no value in astrology if you only have one life. It's absurd that you are born a particular way to do particular things when you only have one lifetime. So this is the great divide between the one lifetime religions, who hold that view, and modern science, whom I call the runaway abused child of the medieval Catholic Church. But all of the one lifetime paradigms leave us cold, leave us alone, do not explain us. We do not have continuity. And so before we go to chapter 18, which is the final conclusion of the Gita, I'm going to sweep us up through a couple of chapters to set a stage for the finale that Nilesh and I have planned for tonight, and our final class in this go-through of the Gita will be next week. So we begin with chapter 2, because Arjuna is refusing to fight. He's a Kshatriya, and he's fighting other warriors, not civilians, and he's very disturbed that he's going to be harming those that he loves and considers family. But the secret is, he says to Bhagavan, I do not want to kill them. And so this is the few verses of chapter 2 we're going to examine one more time. So chapter 2, verse 11. And Sri Bhagavan says, and do remember that Bhagavan is not a human person, but the person of the ultimate divine, who has avatared, come to earth for this Leela, for this game he and Arjuna are playing, so we can have the benefit of their conversation. So, Sri Bhagavan Uvacha. Bhagavan then said about Arjuna complaining that he's going to kill everyone. And he doesn't want to. So, Sri Bhagavan says, the words you speak appear to be full of profound meaning. But those who are wise do not grieve for those who are breathing or those whose breath is gone. And he sets the premise now of the entire book. Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, and from this time forward, none of us will ever cease to exist. If you heard that, class over, you can go home. All right, just kidding. I'm going to keep talking. If you really heard that, then you get it that the source of everything just said, there is no death. Cancel it. There is none. Can't happen, doesn't happen. No living entity can die. They just change bodies or stop having bodies. So let's go a step further. My favorite verse in chapter 2, Dehi no, smin yata dehe, komaram yovanam jara, tata dehantaras praptir, diras tatra namuyate. The same thesis, but now made very clear. Just as a person grows within their deha, perishable body, from childhood to youth to adulthood and then to old age, so at the death of the deha, that's the physical body, their dehi, immortal consciousness, migrates to another deha. One who understands this is not confused by these changes. And in order to perfect chapter 18, we have to remember this particular singular point that is the very essence of the Bhagavad Gita. Ladies and gentlemen, look around you. Look at the chaos. Look at the anxiety. Look at the neurosis. Look at the fear. And yet, no one can die. Not possible. According to Bhagavan. Not possible. Oh, and look, Nilesh is now entering. Sadhu, sadhu. Jai Shri Krishna, Jai. He'll be in momentarily, so when we see his face, we'll turn and greet him. So Nilesh is just joining up. Could that be him? And there he is. Pranams, Nilesh. Please say a brief hello to everyone. I've just gotten started. I've gone to chapter 2 and done Dehi nosmin yata dehe komaram yovanam jara to get us ready. And so now, a word or two from you, and then I'll continue setting up our discussion, in which we'll be co-contributors.
Namaskar to everyone. Very happy to be here. I'm sure Jeffrey mentioned it's a very special day, celebration of Bhagwan Ganesh. Did you mention, Jeffrey, or
Not yet.
No, not yet.
But you tell them.
Sorry.
Please, you tell them, and I've got something
All
in
right.
mind. So yes.
Okay. So
I
it's
do
a
have him
special
sitting
day.
next to me, though.
There we go. It's a Ganesh Chaturthi, celebrated in many different ways, and so very auspicious day. And Jeffrey and I have planned actually a very small thing about Bhagwan Ganesh. We will start with that recitation, or we will do it sometime during the program. And excellent. It's a 18 chapter, so the summary together. So sorry for being late, but I'm so glad I'm here. So back to you.
And why don't you take us into Ganesha a little bit, and then I'll add into it, and we'll do a little mantra chanting, and then we'll head on with the rest of the Gita.
Okay. So Ganesha can be understood from many different angles. His mention is there in the oldest text known as Rig Veda, Om Gang Ganapataye Namaha. Actually, that is there in the Rig Veda. Ganesh is also a representation of the Om. And of course, that can be visualized in many different ways. The great sages have visualized in many different ways. So if all of you can visualize the Om, the way it is written, the circles, and then like a crescent moon at the top, something like this. Now, just many acharyas have imagined in a different way. If you turn this through 90-degree and look at it, you can look at that as the trunk of the elephant. You can also look at it as his big belly. Okay, the big belly is where he stores all the knowledge, not the food. Okay, that's because remember, it's also symbolic. And it is a great representation of Om. And it comes in many different ways, but it also is elucidated in many Upanishads. Just because Ganesh is a direct representation of Om, and therefore everything that is to be known is actually comes to us from a Ganesh, just like a Saraswati, Devi Saraswati. She is the Vak Devata, the deity of or Devata of a knowledge. So is Ganesh. To the extent, there is one Upanishad called Muktikopanishad. Mukti, like in the sense of a liberation or freedom, Upanishad. And it says, what should you study? And it says, don't study anything else. Just study Om. Not even study Om, just say Om, which is also a representation of a Ganesh, or Ganesh is represented by that. And then somebody says, well, that's it. And then there's another Upanishad which says, well, yeah, if you want something more other than Om, then maybe study Mandukya Upanishad, which essentially has like 12, 13 sutras or 12, 13 shloka verses that goes through the explanation of the Om. And this is again how sages or the rishis taught to their students. That's what the Upanishad is about. And now some student might say, I want to know more. This is not enough. I want to know something more. And then say, all right, if you want to know something more, then do this Upanishad. And they go through one Upanishad after another. For example, they may say, do Ishopanishad and so on. And finally, there is one Brahma Bindu Upanishad, and which says, just like when you have a crop harvest coming in, you thrash the what you call palalamiva dhanyarthi. You take this husk and you thrash it, separate the grains, and throw away the husk. Palalamiva dhanyarthi tejet grantham asheshata. That is the beauty of a Sanatan. He says at some point in our journey, we have to even go away from the books, away from the grantha. And again, why? Because we have taken everything that is required, we have internalized it, and now we have to also do the sannyasa or the tyaga of a grantha at some point. But I would say none of us are at that stage right now, so we need not worry. Okay, we better focus on learning about them. And we should wish that a time comes when we may not need to refer to the books. I don't know if you can hear it, but I'll stop on that. And Jeffrey, back to you, and then you and me can recite the 12 names of Ganesha.
Lovely. Just a word more about these devas and the role they play in our evolution. They are the personification of departments of Prakriti, of departments of the realm we're living in. And as such, they personify processes that we need to engage in. And so, in a sense, there are examples, are role models. And Ganesha, you'll notice, has an animal's head with a human body. And the message is that's the plight of being in a human form, that we are half animal, half human. This is what the zodiac is also called. It's the zodiac. The signs of the zodiac are about the animal we're riding, because if each of us is riding an animal, and we're the immortal being inside. So Ganesha is the ultimate reminder of this, and his purpose as a deva is to help us to understand the difference between our immortal nature and our temporary embodiment. And so he's called the remover of obstacles. He's also the source of a word, and then we'll chant the mantra. His name, Gana, gave us the English word gena of genetics. Because the gene pool, or the genetics, is what he's in the personification of. All of those different kinds of combinations that could come out, each make the person you could be talking to at any minute actually speak a particular genetic language. Each of us is coming from a particular perspective that we're embodied within. And Ganesha represents all of those embodiments and all of those perspectives. So you could say that in his presence we learn to become international or even intergalactic ambassadors, capable of seeing the Atma in every living entity, and then being wise enough to interact with them appropriately to their species, appropriately to their nature. And so that's their gene code, isn't it? So Ganesha is the one who helps us do this. So this is through the process called Nyana Yoga. And the essence of Nyana Yoga is na iti, na iti. Instead of knowing or saying what it is, the easiest is to go, well, it's not that, and it's not that, and it's not that, and it's not that. So the last piece is Ganesha has two wives because they were sisters who didn't want to leave each other's company. One is called Buddhi, or discernment, and the other one is called Siddhi, or perfection. And so Ganesha is the personification of the study of everything and the understanding of the appropriate use of everything and who we are and how we're differentiated from the animal we're riding. And more about that in a little while. So want to start out the mantra, Nilesh, and I'll join in?
Sure. I'll say the first two lines, and when we get into the names of 12 names of Ganesha, then Jeffrey and myself will do it together. This is a stotra about Bhagwan Ganesh, and it comes from Narada Puran. The first verse, Pranamya Shirasa Devam Gauri Putram Vinayakam Bhaktavasas Smaredityam Ayuh Kamartha Siddhaye. And now we'll go together. Prathamam
Pratamam Vakratundam
Vakratundancha Ekadantam Dvitiyakam Tritiyam Krishna
Pingam
Pingaksham Gajavakram Chaturtakam.
Panchamam.
Yeah, Panchamam Gajavakram Chaturtakam Lambodaram Panchamancha Shashtam Vikatamevacha Saptamam Vignarajendram Dhumravarnam Tathashtamam Navamam Bhalachandrancha Dashamam Tu Vinayakaha Ekadasham Ganapati Dwadasham Tu Gajanana. Dwadashe, that's that. And I will just add to something. So these are the 12 names. And let me complete that and then I'll tell you what it is. Dvadashetani namani trisandeya pate narat nacha vigna bhayam tasya sarvasiddhi karaprabho vidyarthi labate vidya dhanarthi labate dhanam putrarthi labate putran moksharthi labate gatim जपेद गणपति स्तोत्रम षड्भिर मासम फलम लभेत संवत्सरेण सिद्धिंच लभते नात्र संशया अष्टोभ्य ब्राह्मणा यस्य लिखित्वाय समर्पयेत् तस्य विद्या भवेत् सर्वा गणेशस्य प्रसादतः इति श्री नारद पुराणे संकटनाशनम महागणपति स्तोत्रम संपूर्णम. I'll add a quick note. So when Jeffrey ji stopped and when I continued, that last portion is called a Phala Shruti. Phala Shruti. So if you recite these 12 names before you start your study of Bhagavad Gita or any other study you will be doing, these are the things that will also happen in addition to you getting the knowledge of it. Now, this Phala Shruti comes at the end of any work, such as Bhagavad Gita also. And today, Jeffrey ji will take us through that at the end of it. If anyone chants this Bhagavad Gita, if anyone learns this Bhagavad Gita, what are the benefits of it? Okay. Now, Bhagavad Gita is a very unique book. But in many other stotras, there will be this, I will call it, it's a finger of a honey. When you are giving a medicine to the child, and let's say the medicine is not very good in taste, especially the child doesn't know that, child is not feeling well. Either it's a bitter medicine or doesn't have a right smell, whatever it is. You mix it with the sugar, you mix it with the honey to make it palatable. It is something like this. When somebody doesn't want to chant, doesn't want to study, this one is saying, hey, if you do this will also happen. In the long run, suppose what's the benefit of exercise and the child is not doing it? You might say, hey, you know what? If you go and run around 4 miles every day, I'll give you a chocolate. It's something like this. In the long run, the chocolate is not required. The person is going to see the benefit. And that's why it is given as a Phala Shruti. We will today in 18th chapter, we'll discuss that. The Bhagavad Gita's Phala is there, but it's of a very different kind. In fact, it just makes you disinterested in certain worldly things of life, and that is its phala. Okay, so it is given for a beginner, and saying the names of Ganesha is to begin one's journey into studying this vast literature, what Jeffrey calls the library. Jeffrey, back to you.
Thank you so much, Nilesh. And just before you came, I recited in chapter 2, verse 12, verse 13, Dehinosmin yata dehe komaram yovanam jara. And so it was to start us down the road of this discussion of being the Atma, rather than mistakenly thinking that we're the physical animal body that we're wearing. And so one last comment about Ganesha is that Ganesha is the personification of this quest for our true self by saying what we're not. And the way this was demonstrated in the story was that once Ganesha existed, there was a rat that was bothering all the humans and biting them and causing them trouble. And so they chanted to Ganesha, and he came and he fought with the rat, and he defeated him. And the rat was considered an asura, one working in the dark side of things. So he said to the rat, well, I give you two choices. You become my vehicle and be a mouse. You become my vahana and be a mouse, or I'll have to kill you. And so the rat said, fair enough, and became a mouse. And you'll notice that a mouse nibbles away at things, and if there was a rat in your nursery, you'd be worried. But if there was a mouse, you'd think it was cute. you wouldn't worry about the baby. So this jnana in English is gnawing. When we gnaw away at something and try to understand it, that's the mouse that Ganesha is riding. And the rat that became the mouse is the part of us called ahamkara, our identification with ourself as the physical part of our being. And for a moment, Nilesh has gone off screen. So I'll continue just after the verse, "Never was there a time when I did not exist." After the Dehinosmin, just before the Dehinosmin yata dehe, is a verse that says, "Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future will any of us cease to be." Now, because we're in chapter 18, Nilesh and I have decided to just go on, you might call it an approach to the subject of chapter 18 in the way that we're going to talk about it. So the next place that we're going to pause is in chapter 11 of the Bhagavad Gita. And if you remember, and then I'll hand this to you, Nilesh, to explain a little bit. In chapter 11, Arjuna asks a very interesting question. He says, all right, if you're the supreme being, could you please show me something? He's saying this to Bhagavan, the avatar of the ultimate reality, the supreme being indeed. And so Bhagavan says, sure. And Arjuna says, sure, would you show me how you have entered into this universe, this jagat, as it's called in Sanskrit, and how you do that, how you enter into one and sustain it. And from that moment forward in chapter 11, Krishna begins to reveal the magnitude of his being. Would you like to talk a little bit about that for a moment, Nilesh?
Yes. I was recalling, and number of our participants may or may not remember, of course, a very beautiful coincidence. One of the other times I was part of this class of Jeffrey G, Bhagavad Gita class, and number of you were there, familiar faces, was we were discussing 11th chapter, if you remember. And today, when Jeffrey G will end the 18th chapter, you will see this word Yogeshwar. Krishna is referred to as a Yogeshwar. I want to tell you, refer to three verses from 11th chapter, and then quickly tell you a story of a Anu Gita. Now, let me ask a question to either Sandy G or Jeffrey G. Have you ever talked about Anu Gita in this class? Okay. So a very interesting story, and it has to do with the word Yogeshwar. Very interesting to see not only the seeker, the students of Vedic literature have to be fearless, but also very humble in terms of what we know and what we don't know. But to the extent even Bhagwan Krishna is demonstrating that through his own example, which is also, he states that in Bhagavad Gita. Although I don't need to do anything, he says, but to create a good example for every human being, I also do my karma. I also do the actions. I also do the activities. That's what he's saying in chapter 3, 4, and 5. Let me come to chapter 11. And if you are having a book there, you can follow this. Chapter 11, it's page 183, assuming you have this book here. It's verse number 418 and chapter 11, verse 4. Okay, so the second line, if you just want to point your attention, here it is Arjun who is asking this question. Can I see your universal rupa, universal form? And he says, Yogeshwara tato me tvam. If you think it's possible, I would like to see your universal form. Okay, so this is, you think of as a request from a student. Then if you go to verse number 423, just the next page, chapter 11, verse 9. And I hope I'm telling you the right word. Let's see. Evam yukta rajan maha. Yeah, there you go. Evam yuktva tato rajan maha yogeshwaro hari. Now Sanjay is referring to, and he says, when Arjun, the dear friend and a disciple of Krishna, asked Krishna to show the universal form, Krishna showed that Yogeshwara, Maha Yogeshwaro Hari, he showed the Vishwarup Darshan. Again, remember the word Yogeshwar. And if you now go to chapter 11 and verse 47, and let me just check so that I'm not telling you the wrong one. Verse 47. Yeah. So verse 461, it's page 195. And if you see the first line, second part, Rupam Param Darshitam Atma Yogat. So here Krishna is explaining how I showed this universal form is through my own yoga. Okay, now I'm going to take you to the very last shloka of the 18th chapter. Not that you don't trust me, but just to emphasize that the word yoga or Yogeshwara is there. So this is page number 278. 701 is the verse number, chapter 1878. And it ends, this is the last verse of Bhagavad Gita, Yatra Yogeshwaro Krishna. Page 278, last verse, 701, chapter 18, verse 78. Yatra Yogeshwaro Krishna, Yatra Partho Dhanurdhara. And of course, Jeffrey G will talk about this verse in a detail. It is important verse. This also gives you that Falashruti that I talked about. If you are on the side of a Krishna, then you know what you different benefits you get. Now I want to quickly tell you the story of Anugita. Now this, when is this happening? This is happening on the first day of the Mahabharata War. After this, as you may know the story, or if you don't know the story, then finally Arjuna is convinced. He says, Yathechasi tatha kuru. Now I will do whatever you ask me to do. I am convinced. Krishna, I am convinced. That's what he's saying. Then the war begins. All the things happen. War continues for 18 days. A lot of things after that happen. Bhishma also passes away on the day of winter solstice. Then Pandavas, which is Arjuna and his brothers, they perform the Ashwamedha Yajna. And now finally Krishna is ready to go from Hastinapur to Dwarka, his capital. Okay, that's like going towards the Western India. And Arjun is somewhat not happy that he has to depart, he has to part away, you know, with Krishna's company. So he's somehow trying his best to extend the stay of Krishna in Hastinapur. So he says, you know what, when you told me this Bhagavad Gita, you know what situation I went through. That's chapter 1 and part of chapter 2. And then you told me this, and yes, I did listen to it. It transformed me. I got back to fighting. That's all true. But because it was a tense moment just before the war, actually, I couldn't give a full attention as much as I really wanted to get out of it. Will you please kindly tell me this Bhagavad Gita again? That is what Arjun requests to Krishna. And this comes into the Ashwamedha Parva. Just like the Bhagavad Gita comes into the Bhishma Parva, like a 6th chapter, 6th canto of Mahabharata, this comes into the 13th canto. What Krishna says, and of course, Krishna is a Purushottam, but he's doing his Leela, he's doing the play here. And what he says, Arjuna, is very interesting. And I don't have the Mahabharata text here, but then he says, you know what, Arjun? In a modern language, we will say, I'm just loosely translating what Krishna said. He says, when you ask me, that was a crisis moment. When the Bhagavad Gita was told to Arjuna, like suddenly Arjuna is the main warrior of this side. And right at this crucial moment, he's saying, I'm not going to fight. So this was a crisis moment. And you know what? I had to do what I had to do. That is that word Yogeshwara, 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 Yoga Yukta. He says, I was in my zone, Krishna says, and I gave you this. But you know what? Now that's over. The crisis is not there. And I may not able to do this with the same spirit because there is no crisis hanging around. But what I will do is I will tell you the similar advice that has been told in the past. And that, you know, in the 4th chapter, there is Krishna and Arjuna, there is a discussion. Krishna is saying this knowledge was coming from Brahma to Manu to Saptarshis, okay, and to Imam Vivashwate, from Vivashwan to sun god, and you know, it was coming down and then it was lost. He said, I'll tell you some of this. What is important, he says, Krishna says, when I said this Bhagavad Gita to you, I'm trying to emphasize the importance of Bhagavad Gita. Why? There is a magic in those 701 verses. Because Krishna says, even I was into my yoga mood. I was into the zone in the modern language, you know, and I could impart that. I will not able to, I'm saying in a very humorous fashion, Krishna is saying, I will not able to repeat my performance. So if you want to truly know what Bhagavad Gita is, you have to go back to Bhishma Parva in a way and read those 700 verses. And of course, he goes and gives advice to Arjun and then leaves Hastinapur and leaves for Dwarka. So that is the story of Anugita. At that time, what Krishna told Arjun, and there are many chapters there too, is known as a Anugita. In support of Bhagavad Gita, but keep in mind, it can never replace Bhagavad Gita, and that's what Krishna is emphasizing. With that, back to you, Jeffrey ji.
Thank you so much, Nilesh. And I want to now direct us towards something which is the seva that you and I are doing jointly and individually, and tie it in to a verse in chapter 11, verse 32, because this is the verse where Arjuna is very upset seeing the immensity of the universe, and he's seeing that everything in the universe is going to be destroyed. He's very distraught by this tremendous image. And of course, he's, as Nilesh just said, he's in the midst of a battlefield situation. So this is a very powerful experience to give him. He said, he said this to Bhagavan, could you please show me how you enter into this universe and sustain it? And Bhagavan shows him, but then he also shows him how he destroys it, how he consumes it, how the whole thing is taken apart. And so this happens in a very famous verse, because when the first nuclear weapon was detonated in the sands of New Mexico, a German scientist was there, and he had learned Sanskrit in university. His name was Oppenheimer. And as the first atomic weapon was detonated, he quoted Bhagavad Gita, chapter 11, verse 32. And in that verse, the verse prior to it, Arjuna says, O Supreme Being among the Devas, I bow before you. Prasida, please be kind and merciful unto me. Your terrible cosmic form is very painful to look at and appears to be destructive. Please tell me who you are, O Bhavantam Adyam, O greatest primal being. Please explain your purpose. Now, the importance of this, and this is why Oppenheimer also quoted it, was that Arjuna was seeing that everyone on the battlefield was going to die, that is to say, leave their bodies, and he was seeing this all throughout the universe. And this was so sobering for him that it was hard for him to bear. So he says to Bhagavan, who are you really? Who are you really? And Sri Bhagavan says, Kalo, I am Kala Asmi Loka Shaya Krit Pravrida. I am time, the destroyer of all material worlds. Even without your actions, I am going to annihilate all the warriors standing across from each other on this battlefield, except for you and your brothers. Now, this pivotal verse leads us toward where we're going to go in chapter 18, because as we find our way into the conclusion, it's first with this setup. And the second part is Nilesh and I as a Jyotishi, and he as someone representing the astronomy and the mathematics and the timetable of the Vedic civilization, are contextualizing this in two different ways. He is contextualizing it in the chronological sense so that that is established correctly because it was damaged by colonization and by the Abrahamic religions, by modern science, by British colonization. And one of the things that Nilesh is doing is reestablishing that. Now, the second part of that same discussion is what Jyotish represents, which is that when everyone comes back from their last life, back to embodiment, they're in a continuity from one life to the next, to the next, to the next. And that continuity is also what Bhagavan is trying to give us. And when you see that continuity from life to life, that's called Mahatma. And so, with the verse that we just said, I'm going to give one more in chapter 18, and then in our next hour, Nilesh and I will be able to talk about it, take questions. So, the next verse has to do with the fact that we are all embodied. And this verse is chapter 18, verse 61. Ishvara sarvabhutanam hrideshe Arjuna tishtati. Brahmayan sarvabhutani, and here's the punchline, yantra arudani mayaya. So here's the verse in English. O Arjuna, I am that supreme being who is the ruler and director of all beings. And I live in their hearts just as they reside in a place. From there, meaning in their heart, I cause all things and all beings to revolve. And now I'll repeat the Sanskrit, yantra arudani mayaya. Just as if they were attached to a machine that turns them around and around. And it is this conversation about us landing into a body at a particular moment in time, which Nilesh has become a master at describing the process of how we perceive that astronomical moment by virtue of the texts of the Veda and the Sanskrit knowledge that goes with it. And the science of Jyotish is the unfoldment of that knowledge, and Ayurveda too, for that matter, to help us to go forward from body to body, embodying correctly and understanding that we're in a continuity of lives over great distance. So Nilesh, back to you for about 4 minutes, then we'll take some Q&A, and then we'll open this conversation up in the second part of the class.
Okay, namaskar. I would like to prepare all of you for the second part of the class and want to connect with what Jeffrey said from the 11th chapter about the Kala and the verse that American scientists recited when the first atomic test was done. In fact, you might have heard this story, but if not, very interesting story. It was a big deal when the atomic explosion was done, like, very successfully breaking the atoms and releasing tremendous amount of energy. And this same individual that Jeffrey mentioned, Jeffrey, if you can please repeat the name so I don't say the wrong name. Is it Eisenhower, or was that the name correct? But the name of the scientist that that worked on the whole atom bomb project. Somebody asked him, is now, as a humanity, isn't this the first time such a great thing, such a atomic explosion has happened? And Eisenhower's, or I may be saying the wrong name, his response was, yes, first time in our times. That is to say, not if you go into the past, okay? Something of that effect he responded. And so that brings us to a couple of points. One is this whole avatara, like how it comes to, anytime there is a severe disturbance, it comes to fix it, it comes to restore it, and leave us with the knowledge that we can use. So we talked about Krishna's avatar timing last time, 7,500 years ago. And that knowledge is still there. Like the knowledge that he imparted through Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavad Puran is still with us. In that context, I forgot the name. Please forgive me. I think it was Zubin, if I remember correctly. He asked a question about the Yuga. So when I mentioned Ramayana's time as 14,000 years ago, is Zubin on the call today? Not sure. He asked the question, the yugas are such a vast time periods. The Kali Yuga is 432,000 and Dwapar is so on. And how do we reconcile that with Ramayana, which happened in the Treta Yuga, so 2 yugas before that? How do we reconcile? And quickly, I want to take a minute or so. I'll not explain everything. The moderators or Sandy or someone, can you enable me to share something on the screen, please? Excellent. Yeah, I can do it. Okay, I don't want anyone to be overwhelmed by this. Okay, that's not the idea. But what I'm trying to do is answer the question that Zubin asked. And since he asked that question, and I thank him, I'm sure that is a question on the minds of many. In fact, when I give my lectures, it's a frequently asked question. I want to just create a framework, and then we'll leave that for a question answer into the part 2, once Jeffrey had a time to cover the key points of chapter 18. What happens is that we hear the word yuga and we immediately think there is only one type of yuga. The answer is that's not correct. Actually, there are many types of yuga, and we will elaborate that depending on the time we have towards the second part. But just if you take the time, just the timekeeping in the sense of the time that we talk in the clock, or the days and the months and the weeks and the years, Actually, the timekeeping, there are two types of time. One is a space time. Okay, that's something we are familiar with. Like, time. How do we measure time, guys? Actually, we measure the time using a space, which is to say somebody moved from here to here, sun moved this much in the sky, or even all in our wall clock, we said the long arm moved from 12 to 2, and therefore 10 minutes have gone by, and so on and so forth. So we are looking at the space to decide the time. But there is something else, and all of us are actually familiar with it. It's called the psychology time or a physiology time. I'll not elaborate on that on this slide. Now you can also split it vertically, and you say, how do we use this knowledge? Well, sometimes we use this knowledge for understanding a much bigger picture, as like our cosmos, like when this universe began and when this universe might end, when the earth might end, and when the sun might end. So those are the bigger pictures. But at the bottom is the local and contextual, which is like saying how long is when did United States of America came into being? When did Canada came into being? And when did India got its freedom from the British? Or some such relatively local, relatively short-term issues that we want to know. And that's the local or contextual times. I want to stop here. My 4 minutes must be over already. But what I want to say is that there are actually 4 types of yuga. So one, I just use the axis of space-time, and another axis of applicability. And towards the second portion and towards the end of it, actually, I will walk you through the examples from the library that Jeffrey always refers to. Okay, Sanatana is the library. There is not one book, and I'll show you example that falls into each of these, but also quote an example from our practical experience, our current knowledge of science, current knowledge of humanity, what we know, and just tell you how beautifully it matches. So I will need to share it again, Sandy ji, afterwards. But for now, I will stop sharing it. Back to you, Jeffrey ji.
Well, I thought that was rather clever that you've now explained the whole enchilada. So it's such a big subject, and I know you two guys can talk about the time-space continuum and just how big these yugas are. And for the Western person, it's just mind-blowing. We just don't have those big concepts. And I was speaking with Jeffrey earlier today, just over Ganesha's birthday. What a great role model he must have been that we remember his birthday. I mean, we don't remember birthdays from our grandparents or great-grandparents, 3 generations ago. And yet we know Ganesh and Saraswati and Krishna. We know all of these birthdays because they are encoded in these great texts astronomically. So Nilesh, thank you for doing all of this research for us dummies down here. So we really appreciate it. Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to ask everybody, if anyone has a question, raise your hand. This is your opportunity to ask these great questions of these two. Balaram, you want to start? Go ahead.
Hare Krishna, thank you very much.
Hare Krishna.
I want to thank the co-hosts for the great discourse so far, and I'm already having a great time. My question is, it refers actually to the end of the conversation talking about the yugas. I have read, and I have a hard time recalling exactly where I read it from, but I have read that the great events like the Ramayana and even events like the Mahabharata actually are happening eternally, either in the spiritual plane or at various material universes at different points of time. And when I've read that, of course, I cannot confirm nor deny that is true because I have no knowledge. But if that is true, are the cycles of time on the grander scale are they similar? Are they the same in these other material universes? Is there any overlap between them? And uh, how does that relate with the way that we as small human beings experience our own time scale? You know, we hear about, for example, in Srila Prabhupada's works, that Lord Brahma lives 100 of his years, but that's equivalent to trillions and hundreds of trillions of years for us on our time scale. So I would definitely like to get some insight on the continuation of these great leelas or pastimes and how they correlate with our perception of time.
Well, that's a big question and it requires a big answer. Nilesh or Jeffrey, which one of you would like to take that one? Jeffrey?
All right.
No,
Okay.
Nilesh, let Nilesh.
Yes, Jeffrey's pointing at me, I think. As Sandy ji said, it is a big question. And this is something we cannot do a justice to that in a short time we have. But the question is very good question. And I want to answer it in a couple different ways. In fact, as an ultimate reality, we will not know everything. That's why Jeffrey mentioned, what is the method of study? Neti, na iti, neti, neti. You see that in Bhagavad Gita itself. Like, what is Atma? Okay, second chapter. And when Krishna is explaining, Krishna is not saying Atma is this. In fact, Krishna is saying, Nainam chindanti shastrani, Nainam dahati pavaka. That one is Atma, that cannot be cut with a sword, that cannot be burnt with a fire, that cannot be moistened with water. So he's giving in the way what is not. Now, this is not to avoid your question, Balaram Dasji, that you asked. Precisely the question that you ask, it is such such a vast scope that if I try to answer even a limited time, but I don't mean just the 1 hour that we have, even if I was talking for 5 days, there is a genuine risk that I'm going to leave the listener with more confusion than more knowledge. And that is where the role of guru comes, the role of guru. And on that note, actually, I want to take a quick minute and tell you one story. It comes from Brihad Aranyak Upanishad. Because what the magic of a guru is, guru knows which, you are basically in the class of Jeffrey G, and Jeffrey G knows your individual psychological state to an extent and can guide you in a particular way. I can confuse you, okay? And I don't want to do that. But there is a beautiful story in Brihad Aranyak Upanishad. I think that illustrates this point. Brahma created Sura, think of that as a Deva. He created Asura, think of that as a Danava. And he created Manushya, Manava, the human beings. Okay? He created and he said, go enjoy your life. Now, when they started doing it, they said, let me go back to our father and a guru, the Brahma, the creator, father in the sense of a creator, and ask for some advice. I don't know how many of you have heard this story. So they go back to Brahma. And so first, Deva or Sura, they go back to Brahma and says, please give us some advice. And Brahma gives the advice. He says, my advice to you is letter the. In the alphabetical Sanskrit Nagari script, the letter the, as in you will know what it is in. And the Suras were very happy. They discussed among themselves. They said, what do we think Brahma was, our father, our creator, was intending by the letter the? And they all came to the agreement that they should do damana. Okay? Because they are kami. Kama, krodha, lobha. That's the discussion we are doing. So they understood this as a damana. They should control their desire. Okay. Now it was the turn of Asura. Asura went to Brahma and said, please give us something as an advice to live our life happily. And Brahma said, all right, I have something very beautiful for you. And do you know what Brahma said? Brahma said, For you, I give the advice in the form of letter the, exactly same letter. So Asuras went back, they started discussing what would be the meaning of it. And they understood that by they should do daya, be kind, okay, to everyone. Why? Because by nature, they are very krodhi, tends to be on the angry side. And finally, it was the term of the human beings, manusha or manava, okay, main, that's where the main comes from, you can say. They go to Brahma and says, please give us some advice. Brahma says, I've got very wonderful advice for you, and you can guess what it is. Here is the letter the. So then human beings came together, discussed it, and realized that Brahma intended them to do dana, which is to give, because the human beings tend to keep everything. Will I have sufficient? Will I have enough? The point here is Brahma gave the same advice to three different folks, three different groups, but they took it based on their understanding of it, their background knowledge. And that's what happens when when I showed you 4 types of yoga, but even one type of yoga, everyone, just like Balaramji, you took a certain meaning of it and you took this whole discussion in a one direction, and that's great, but it cannot be answered here. People can take it in 4 different direction or 10 different direction, and it actually can cause confusion. And that's where the role of a guru comes in. Guru understands the particular situation of the disciple and says, you know what, just focus on this. Or for you, the definition of a yoga is so and so. Or maybe for now, this is the definition of a yoga. Back to you, Sandy ji or Jeffrey ji.
Jeffrey, do you want to add to that in any way, or do you want to move to the next question?
I'll just add a little bit. It is said that the Vedic knowledge is to be applied according to Desha, Kala, and Patra, 18th chapter. It means you're supposed to apply it according to the place, the time, and the person. So this is where books like the Bhagavad Gita are so important, because when the subject expands out to all of its applications, it becomes immense and sounds more like a legal situation in a complex courtroom. And so it's very necessary to have something like the Bhagavad Gita so that the essential principles do not become obscured by the minutiae of everything as it's manifest. Because it's so vast, because the Veda dealt with that vastness rather than ignoring it. Now, with no disrespect to them, the Abrahamic religions decided not to do anything that resembled that much detail or that much time. In a sense, they created a small room and told everyone, just be good and do what you're told. The Veda did the opposite. It said, we're going to treat you like adults. We're going to show you the big picture. And if you're not careful, you'll get distorted because you can't directly experience that. So be very careful. The term is adhikari. Adhikari means the readiness of the student. It gave us the word educare in Latin and education in English. So what Nilesh is doing is giving us a taste of something that he could elaborate into an immense amount of detail. In the very same way that if I started talking about Jyotish, at first you'd see there were just 9 grahas or planets, but then you'd start to see all of the complexity of coming back and having particular karmas follow you back, be scheduled for activity, be scheduled to land, and then eventually landing. This makes NASA look like a junkyard. This is so precise and so vast and so much. So it's very important in learning this Vedic Vidya to get the fundamental principles and not lose your orientation as you listen to the elaboration of those into so many elaborate and amazing tapestries of knowing. So if you can do that, you won't get confused and lost by it. So if you hold on to the vocabulary of the Gita at its most fundamental, then you'll come back to that vision. And that is what books like the Gita are all about. They act as the platform of steadiness in the midst of the possibility of making the conversation as complex as the universe in which we're discussing it. So both of these, and Nilesh is you might say, a pioneer in bringing that level of vastness and complexity of the Veda as chronological understanding, as well as the detailed nuances of science. And so this is an amazing renaissance taking place right now before our eyes. And we who are Jyotishis and things like that are taking psychology to a level that it's far beyond anything that's been imagined, because we're showing people the archetypes that they're participating in and how those archetypes are not them, but part of the equipment that they've come with. So as we conduct this conversation, both Nilesh and I, you're supposed to find yourself getting a little lost at a certain point, just as the complexity shows up. But don't let that undermine the fundamental vocabulary that this Gita is giving you. All right, and with that, back to Sandy.
Jeffrey, you read the verse where in the Bhagavad Gita where it says we come in riding on a yantra. That is such a profound verse, because Christianity, the Abrahamics, took that conversation of astrology out. Even when they were in India, they made it illegal, and it has greatly degraded even in India. But to have that kind of verse written in a book that was written 7,000 years ago, and I can't say enough about Nilesh's work to be able to astronomically backtrack all of the astronomical texts in the Mahabharata to actually pinpoint the date that someone is born, someone is speaking this important text is just phenomenal. I mean, it's that 7,000 years ago, they were not cavemen living in the backwoods. These were highly intelligent, developed people, a society that considered many things, and they were watching the stars. How? We're not 100% sure. Maybe you can explain that, Nilesh, but the fact that they knew you were coming in as an entity with your own special qualities and your own special karma this time, and an astrologer 7,000 years later can look at a stranger's chart and know what that chart, what the blueprint is of the body of that being coming in and the karmas that are traveling with that being. It's phenomenal. I mean, we should all be jumping up and down saying, my God, how does that happen? Anyway, you two are pulling it all together, and I get excited just listening to you two. So anybody else have a question? Raise your hand. Raven, is that a hand? Nice to see you.
Good to see you too. So this is specifically about chapter 11, verse 47, number 461. This is about the use of the term original and universal, and how Krishna is specifically saying that I'm kind by showing you this form. Was he being serious there, or was he joking? Had he never ever showed anyone this exact universal form? Or was it sort of like this universal form appeared to Arjuna specifically for him, like his personal Ishtadev? Or is he meaning universal that it has the universe in it?
It's an interesting question, Raven, and it's difficult for us to bring these moments into English. So I just want to caution everyone on this. In the context in which they were speaking, we're not entirely sure by the time it lands as an English translation that that was exactly what he said. So take it with a little bit of a grain of salt that he was trying to explain that his purpose was to bring a certain clarity to this message that had been lost and that continually gets lost. A kind of refocusing that brings it back into focus, and therefore, if we're not careful, we won't give the right priority to certain realizations and we'll get lost in the details. Nilesh, why don't you talk a little bit about that too?
I will add by saying what Sandy gave as answer to Aaron, I think. I think if I recall correctly, when I had this pleasure of joining this class when we were discussing 11th chapter, I did some way ended up answering that question that she just asked. Is this the first time a universal form is being shown, and in what way it is unique? Actually, Krishna has shown a universal form in multiple times, but he is saying in the 11th chapter that the form I am showing you, no one has seen this before. It is very unique. And now this can, as Jeffrey said, if you don't take it in the right context, and if you cannot read between the lines, you can lead yourself or even others to confusion. He has, for example, shown the form to the Kauravas when Krishna went on a peace mission. But guess what? Many people could not even look at the form. Many people could not see the form, and some of them who could see whatever they saw, again, is beyond language. Somebody's trying to capture it. They were scared and they were totally fearful. Now, Krishna's adopted mother, Yashoda, okay, to her also Krishna showed a universal form. And with that magic, of course, she had just totally went into a trance. And then afterwards, Krishna made sure she forgot all about it so that the mother and child relationship is restored. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just want to add to that what I think is a delicious piece of that story. Krishna's older brother Balaram is playing in the backyard, and so is Krishna, and Krishna is the younger of the two. And Balaram comes running to the door and says to Yasoda, Mom, Krishna's eating dirt again. So they're playing like a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. And so she calls Krishna to the door and says, is that true what your brother said? And he says, no, look, I'll show you. Now, I think this is such a comedy show. It's so spectacular that just that moment is totally unforgettable. Because in that moment, at 3 years old, Yasoda, Krishna's mother, looks in his mouth and sees the same Virata Purusha that scares the daylight out of Arjuna. Arjuna, this great warrior, is just trembling in fear looking at it. And Yasoda, Krishna's mother, sees the same thing in his 3-year-old mouth, and she goes, oh, well, it's time for your lunch. That's how frightened she was. Oh, well, it's time for your lunch. So it's very important to remember, and then I'll give it back to Nilesh. It's very important to remember that who Krishna is giving this to, and as Nilesh said, in a particular moment, in a particular mood, we don't understand these nuanced conversations, these subtle, profound differences. It's not the same vision when Yasoda sees it, because she's a different viewer, and the angle is different, and the mood is different. And then when you show it to Arjuna on a battlefield in the midst of this, then for him, the same thing shows up another way. So one of the things we should all be remembering is how much we project of our conditioning into what we're hearing. And this is what the guru is for, to make sure that we don't use our previous misconceptions to have preconceived understandings of the Veda. And now over to you, Nilesh.
Well, a couple of points only I want to add there. The question that I forgot the name here, but what Raven that she asked, or what Balaram Das asked. we have a, in a way, lesson learned in chapter 11. Arjun was very enthusiastic after the Vibhuti Yoga to see the universal form of Krishna. But when Krishna showed it, and we again, what are we understanding from 11th chapter is something that's limited by language 1,000 times or million times down, somewhere put it into the words, what Arjun saw. Arjun is a very brave warrior, but how is he describing? He's saying literally his mouth went dry. Yeah, right? The way Jeffrey showed, that's what happened. And so he wanted to say it, but when actually the answer was given, he answered in the sense the form was shown, he was not very happy. It was not very pleasing. He was not happy in that company. In fact, he started going on all fronts. He said, "Oh, my dear, please forgive me. I consider you my friend. I played with you, and I did not recognize who you were." And finally, he's requesting, "Please, please, please, just forget what I asked you. Will you please kindly show me your form that I am so used to?" Okay. And this is not to stop anyone from asking the question, but that's why the guru's role is important. And so, Balramji, what you asked, that's a great question. But, in fact, your work will go up and you will like it, I know. Because usually last time when Zubin asked that question, I said, if you watch YouTube, go to YouTube, type my name, Nilesh and Yoga, and then he's going to get 10 talks, 1 hour long on the yoga that he has to watch. Something like the last question that somebody asked, I'm going to say on Sattology, I have 100 plus talks about hour long, and that somebody would have to watch, and still the person may not get the whole answer. Okay, so I think it's very important that we focus what questions we ask. Again, that's not to discourage you from asking question. And last time I used the word saprayojana and sandigdha. You have that doubt because you have studied in depth some 2 subjects or 2 contradictory answer in depth, and still you have a questions, therefore you ask. That is one reason. And saprayojana, which is to say a purpose driven, which is to say if somebody answers that question, or if you are lucky to find the answer on your own, what problem does it solve? If you cannot answer that question, then maybe some questions are better not answered, because it may take you a long time and send you in a tangential direction for a long time. Back to you, Sandy.
Also, the other thing here is that we have students of various degrees of knowing, and much of it, sometimes we've covered many of these things in previous classes, so we do have to limit a little bit. We'll take one more question. We've got about half an hour left, and I want to hear from Nilesh and Jeffrey again. Balaram Das, do you have a quick question that we can, not so deep as the last one, okay? Go ahead.
My question is that the concept of achintya beda tattva, would you say that it's fair? Is that would that be an applicable explanation for the seemingly contradictory answers on the nature of these bigger topics like the yugas?
I'll let Jeffrey take that one.
That's an excellent question, Balaram Das, and I was about to lead us into that particular part of the conversation as well, so thank you. Just as the Bhagavad Gita is one text that has a very reliable and brief nature so that you can grasp it and get into the Sanskrit, the dynamic of the Sanskrit, and come to understand what it's actually saying, memorize it. So there are 2 other groups of texts that are the Vedic backbone of sampradayas, like the one that Prabhupada A.C. Bhaktivedanta brought, Achintya Beda Abeda Tattva, or Vasista Dvaita of Ramanuja, or Advaita of Shankaracharya, or Dvaita of Madhva Acharya, and Nimbarka Vishnu Swami, and most recently the Swaminarayan movement from Gujarat. All of these are held accountable in the following way. There are 3 groups of Vedic texts, or 3 texts, that they must compare, and they must use the Sanskrit accurately according to Sanskrit scholars. Those 3 are the Bhagavad Gita, the Vedanta Sutras of Veda Vyasadeva, and the 10 principal Upanishads taken from the rest of the Veda. Those are called Prasthana Trayi, the 3 pillars of Vedic evidence, upon which one must comment the way we're commenting now, but at the Sanskrit level, at every level of accountability. So just imagine that you need to know every verse of the Bhagavad Gita, every verse of the 10 principal Upanishads by heart, and the 550 or so verses of the Yoga Sutras of Veda Vyasadeva, of the Vedanta Sutras of Veda Vyasadeva. Now you have to compare the meanings of all of those Sanskrit words, the ways they were used, the context they were in, and you have to be able to do that in order to establish what's called sampradaya in India, in the Vedic context. In other words, to establish a school of thought like Achintya, Beda, Abeda, which wasn't actually Chaitanya per se, but Baladev Vijayabhuchana did the Vedanta Sutra commentary that was necessary. Chaitanya brought the position forward, and one of his students did a Vedanta Sutras commentary on the Prasthana Trayi and established Gaudiya Vaishnavism as a sampradaya, as a genuine, agreed upon by all Sanskrit scholars to be a lineage. The same thing happened with Ramanuja, the same thing happened with Madhva, the same thing happened in each historical moment where a group of Vedic scholars who knew all of this to a degree that's beyond our understanding, really, commented on those 3 texts and established a school of thought. Now, those schools of thought are not meant to make each other incorrect. They're meant to reveal the various subtle ways in which this could be observed so that we get the larger picture of that knowledge. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back to Nilesh to also give an angle of comment upon this. So this is an important question, Balaram, and also one not to ever become perplexed by or in animosity about or angry defending one's own sampradaya, but rather be gracious and appreciative of all of the great acharyas who took the trouble to comment on these. And now over to you, Nilesh.
Yeah, I mean, considering the time, I don't want to add too much to this. Jeffrey ji covered it very well. I just wrote one comment in the chat section there saying these various points of view, Achintya Bheda, Dvaita, Advaita, Shuddha Advaita, Vishishta Advaita, Dvaita Advaita, all these are meant to be complementary. Similar to Balramji, but other, you might have heard Darshana Shastra. There are 6 major Darshana Shastra like Sankhya, Yoga, Vaisheshika, Nyaya, Purvamimamsa, Uttarmimamsa. Even when you hear the story of Mandana Mishra and Shankaracharya having a debate on the Purvamimamsa versus Uttarmimamsa, see, this is not a debate, the kind of debate you might see at the Oxford debate, for example, where the whole idea is using the rhetoric and, just trying to punch the line somewhere just to prove your superiority. That's not the idea. In fact, the idea behind this debate was they meant to be complementary. When you focus on something, that's a sanyam. Dhyana, dharana, samadhi brings you a sanyam, a balance. When you focus on something, one particular subject, a lot of good comes out of it. And that's exactly what has happened. I don't know if by Jeffrey, when he said student of a student, he meant Jiva Goswami or somebody else. But for example, Jiva Goswami in the Gaudiya tradition has literally taken this to nitty-gritty details. I mean, if you look at the Tattva Sandarbha and all the books, but if you notice, Jiva Goswami is very comfortable when required, and when he doesn't want to do extra work, very comfortable quoting Shankaracharya. Not many people know that. Jiva Goswami very comfortably will quote Shankaracharya because Shankaracharya has covered that. He doesn't want to spend time on it and he moves on. So it's not only complementary, but it leads to the growth of knowledge because you take a particular point of view and explore it in a very spiritual fashion.
Imagine, if you will, that you have 9 uncles who are all amazing individuals. And all of them are just so remarkable that you've never really had time to understand the depth and fullness of their character and of what they knew and so forth. Now imagine they're all flying on a private jet and it crashes, and all of them leave you a will. All of them leave you the legacy that they had created. So which one of those would you reject, of those legacies? None of them. You would accept all of them. Gratefully, humbly, with great curiosity. And it would take you years and years and years, if you could even, to understand the depth of these great beings and what they had handed over to you. So, because I've been working on etymology within English, I'd like to refine this conversation by just one little word change. Debate means to beat someone and to hit them, and that's what the bait part is. It means to beat upon. Vedanta is not a debate. It is, in fact, an argument. Now, we use argument as if it's debate in English nowadays. But in fact, it's from the word argentum in Latin and Arjuna in Sanskrit. And it means rubbing ideas together until they shine brighter and brighter, the way you would polish silver. When you rub on silver with the right cloth, the silver becomes as bright as possible. That's argumentation. That's Vedanta. No one's beating on each other. They have tremendous admiration for each other. And so I'll just end this segment and give it back to Sandy and Nilesh with a story about this that happened to one of those great acharyas. His name is Ramanuja. He was the one who came after Shankara. So Shankara is Advait, and Ramanuja is Vashishta Advait, sometimes translated qualified Advait. And so the story goes that Ramanuja was in the midst of an argument that was scheduled in a town, and it was to last for 2 weeks, 14 days, between someone from the Advait tradition and this new viewpoint that he was representing as Vashishta Advait. And thousands of people were there listening to these two great pundits discuss. And on the 13th day, Ramanuja just got devastated by his opponent, just flattened. And on the way home that night, he was so tired, he stopped in a temple of Bhagavan and he offered obeisances to the deity, and then he was so exhausted he fell asleep. And he woke up the next morning just with enough time to get back to the last day of the discussion, of the argument. And he got back, but he had, in the presence of the deities and in the extremity of his dedication, he had gone into another state of consciousness that is well known amongst yogis, that is such an advanced state of samadhi that it begins to cause physical manifestations that can only be present in that state of ecstasy. And so Ramanuja came back, and the person with whom he was having this 14-day conversation was there. And this other person knew he had devastated him the day before. But after about a few minutes of sitting in the presence of Ramanuja, the person he was having this 14-day discussion with, this other great scholar, stood up and said, "O Ramanuja, you are showing the ecstatic symptoms that all of us in the Vedic civilization hope to achieve and to feel and to someday experience. And I know what those mean. And so he offered Dandavat Pranams, went flat out like a stick and said, you win. You have what we all want. We want to be in that state of consciousness that I see the symptoms that you are displaying. Famous story to show us how the Sanskrit makes this a deep, profound conversation, but do not think it's an argument. Think it's a exchange with the utmost respect of deep and profound ideas that are not even easy to bring into full expression, just as you see with Nilesh and I trying to find a way to bring them into English. So over to you now, Nilesh. Just wanted to add to that metaphor.
Yeah, no, that was beautifully covered. And no, I don't have actually anything to add. What I want, Sandy and Jeffrey, is we have about 15 minutes. Jeffrey, if you want to give a summary of chapter 18, conclude in some fashion. And if there is a time, I want to take 5 minutes or so. And the 4 types of yoga that I showed, I want to give an example of each. With the hope that it doesn't create a confusion, but actually gives. So in order to understand those 4 types of yoga, you have to forget everything you know about the yoga and not try to bring it into it. Then you will truly enjoy what they are. Okay, just take that as additional piece of excellent knowledge for your synthesis. But before I do that, Jeffrey ji or Sandy ji, if you want to conclude in some fashion the chapter 18, I want to make sure that there is a time for that. And then I'll get into the yoga slide.
Thanks, Nilesh. I just wanted to, we'll let you end on that, absolutely. I'd love to hear it. I also wanted to just mention, there's many special guests on here that are here for the first time. If you've enjoyed the class, I invite you to go to gitacomes.alive.com to the membership area and join the membership, because once you're in that membership, you get 2 weeks free and access to over 100 classes, but you also get access to what we have on there called the Gita on the Go app. And it is quite an incredible app. It's better than Kindle. And all of the Sanskrit words that are embedded in Gita Comes Alive are linked to the glossary. So it helps you learn the Sanskrit as you go along, because Jeffrey embedded a lot of Sanskrit, over 200 words, into the book that were not word for word synonyms. So real good learning process for words that are not available in English. So Gita Comes Alive in the membership. Thanks for posting that. I think Parker did that. Thank you very much. All right, Jeffrey, over to you for a conclusion.
Before I hand it over to Nilesh, and I'd like him to sort of be the finale tonight and bring us to a crescendo, I want to just say that I had planned to stop at chapter 18, verse 63. And so I will reread chapter 18, verse 61. Ishvara sarva bhutanam hrideshi Arjuna tishtati. This is the verse in which the yantra arudani, that all of us have a yantra within us, which in Jyotish is the horoscope, the yantra, the diagram of the planetary positions. So text number 18, chapter 18, verse 61, O Arjuna, I am that supreme being who is the ruler and director of all beings, and I live in their hearts, just as they reside in a place. From there, I cause all beings, and I cause all things and all beings to revolve. Yantra arudani mayaya, just as if they were attached to a machine that turns them around and round. Therefore, next verse, O Arjuna, wholeheartedly take shelter in the divine refuge of my being. Receive the loving gift of blissful existence and soon you will attain to my immortal realm. And the last verse for this evening, and then over to Nilesh. Now I have revealed to you Guyad Guyatra, that knowledge which is the secret of secrets. This is the most secret understanding that I have shared with you thus far. After considering this very carefully, do as you wish. So that'll be the last verse for this evening, and it shows you this avatar, Purna, full avatar, not even partial, full avatar, making a self-revelation of truly epic proportions. And that is what this chapter 18 is leading us up to. Our journey of going round and round in samsara, this Gita bringing us to a position of self-understanding that excels anything we've had or achieved before, and that with this secret of secrets, we're being invited into a direct, friendly, personal relationship with Bhagavan. And Nilesh, over to you for the conclusion.
All right. Namaskar, everyone. As I said, I want to go back to Zubin's question. So Zubin, you are very dear to me. So I want to try that. Again, the important thing I'll mention is very important for all of us who are listening to this, is to listen to this with keeping all the knowledge of what you knew about the Yuga. I'm not asking you to give it up, but definitely keep that in the background, okay? If you try to do the comparison with this, and I think Balaram Das made a great point. These are multiple perspectives. One does not necessarily discredits the another. But if you just focus without that previous bias, you will enjoy this more. It's my humble submission. So so in the previous one, I started these 4 quadrants. I created the 4 quadrants. The one axis is a space-time, the time that we kind of are familiar with. The psychology and a physiological time is something we are also familiar. But right now you must be wondering what that is. What is psychological time or what is physiological time? And the global and universal aspect of the time, and therefore Yuga, is also we are familiar with, and so is the local. But some of you might be wondering right now, and that's perfectly okay. I'm going to give you a broad summary of what those 4 quadrants are. Just for simplicity, or just for us to grab onto something, I have given this name, like a philosophical Yuga. Okay. Culture. So some of the words you see: cultural evolution, tattva jnana, like a philosophy. Okay. Moral degradation. And I'll give you a story, because story does a good job of explaining what that is. The other one is a practical type of Yuga. It's a physiological evolution. It's a generation, like, just like one generation to another generation, that's like considered as a Yuga. Ramayana as a one Yuga, Mahabharata as a one Yuga. These are not defined by just the time, but the fact that Ramayana has a certain social setup, or certain type of cultural setup, certain type of time, place, and circumstances that Jeffrey referred to. That's why it's considered one Yuga and another is another Yuga. That's a practical way of defining it. Theoretical, which is like how this cosmos was formed, like such as think of a geological evolution or biological evolution, the formation of the earth, formation of the cosmos, formation of the Milky Way, formation of the life, evolution, whatever you want to call it, on this earth or in a solar system. That's what we're talking about. Keep that in mind, theoretical. And then there is a chronological Yuga. So when I talk about Mahabharata happening 7,500 years ago, or Ramayana happening 14,000 years ago, based on a very specific text, such as Valmiki Ramayana or Vyasadev's Mahabharata, we are into this bottom right-hand quadrant, that particular time aspect, not everything else. For example, the philosophy, the spirituality is forever, just like the Vedas are eternal. But that particular historical event from the iti ha asa, this is how it happened. You might add this time. This is how it happened this time, this particular time, the way it is given in the Mahabharata text that we have access to. It's a particular chronological one. Now, on a very lighter moment, but actually, I hope it illustrates these four types. I'm going to walk you through one or two examples of each. I refer to philosophical yuga. As Jeffrey G always loves to explain it, actually, I picked that term from him, that Sanatana is Vedic religion or Vedic dharma is basically a dharma of a library or a religion of a library. I'm pulling few books from that library. Quickly, two references for philosophical yuga. This is the Aitreya Brahmana, which is the text connected with Rig Veda, and it gives a psychological or a physiological definition of a yuga. Do you know what it says? I'll skip the Sanskrit part here, Kali Shayano Bhavati and so on. He says when you are sleeping, and that's what I briefly mentioned last time. At a certain physiological level, when you are sleeping, you are in a Kali Yuga. When you wake up, but you are still sitting, you are in a Dwapar Yuga. When you stand up, you are in a Treta Yuga. And when you start doing the activity, which is very important, you are in the Satya Yuga or the Kruta Yuga, the best of the Yuga. And then it ends here saying Charayaveti, Charayaveti, Charayaveti. Keep on walking, keep on walking, keep on acting, keep on acting. So it is giving you a message through the medium of a yuga for the action. Quickly, I'll tell you this story of the decadence and unification of a Daivi Asuri Pravritti. This is said in a very humorous fashion. It says in the Satya Yuga, the best of the yuga that we say, you know, the good and the bad, okay, the Daivi and the Asuri Prakriti or Pravritti, the 16th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, okay? Think of that. The good qualities and the bad qualities in a simple language. They were across the intergalactic sphere. So for example, if there were good qualities here in one place, the Suras or Devas, the Asuras were on the another planet altogether. You know, this is said in a metaphorical fashion to make it easy for us to understand. Now, when you come to Treta Yuga, now think of Treta Yuga as the timing of Ramayana, okay? The bad and good qualities, the Rama, but also the Ravanas, are on this same planet. It's no longer intergalactic, so to say, okay? Maybe different countries, the Lanka versus Ayodhya, but on the same planet. Now, of course, it's said in a humorous way, but with a meaning behind attached to it. Now, let's come to Dwapar Yuga, which is the time of Mahabharata. And now what is happening? The good and bad qualities are in the same family. Mahabharata is a war between two cousin factions, the Pandavas and the Kauravas. And now the yuga that we are in, the Kali Yuga, guess what? To look at the good qualities and the bad qualities, the Daivi Pravritti and the Asuri Pravritti, you know, the 16 chapter list again, we don't have to go anywhere. We don't have to go even to another family member. We can just look at ourselves. Each of us individual has those both, okay? So that's the one way of explaining this using the yuga, but of a different kind. Quickly, the second one, the practical one, and this is real. Although to us, it may feel if we don't have this experience of a devotion, or if we don't have this scientific experience like the experiment of Einstein, we may not relate to it. But this is the verse, and I'm sure a number of you would relate to, but Balaram Das ji there, and of course, Jeffrey ji and Sandy ji would relate to this. This is from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's, the 8 verses that are attributed to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. One of those, Yugayitam Nimeshena Chakshusha Pravrushayitam Shunyayitam Jagat Sarvam Govinda Virahena Me. Briefly, what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is saying is, if I feel a separation from a Govinda, even for a fraction of a second, Nimesha, it's a very small fraction of a second, I feel that time of separation, that fraction of a second, as if it's like a yuga. So time has warped. And Einstein also did similar experiments. Because of time, I will not go there. So this is another type of a yuga, which is what? It's actually a fraction of a second in your wristwatch. But to that individual, therefore, it is local. It's not experience of everyone. To that individual, like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he's feeling it like as far, as long as a yuga. Okay, I could go more on this, but I'll skip. Now, the theoretical time, especially the one that Zubin asked, or today Balramji asked, what about this 432,000 and 864,000? Guess what, guys? Where in the Indian ancient literature, where do you get these numbers the first time? You get these numbers first time, not in the Puranas, not in the Itihasa, not anywhere else, but you get them into the astronomy text. This 432,000, 864,000 times 1:2:3:4 ratio, adding up to 4.32 million years of a Mahayuga, 4 yugas together. All of that happens in the astronomy text. And it has a totally different perspective. It is not there to measure our chronological time. It is given in a mathematical formation so that we know the precise and accurate orbital periods and therefore positions of the planets. And therefore, someone like Jeffrey G, who is good at astrology, can use that for his purposes. That is one of the key applications of it. Its purpose is not to use the chronological time. That comes down to this. And how do we measure the chronological time? We measure the chronological time using the moon's motion, the tithi, the nakshatra, the lunar month, lunar phase, the month, the solar year, and then we add multiple of these, and we use some definition of a yuga. But if you use those definitions of a yuga from Puranas, but also Mahabharata, especially Mahabharata, you are not going to see these 432,000 numbers. So that's just a quick summary of it. Again, I hope that I don't add to any confusion. I think that's not my idea. But if you take it in this fashion, and each of this has evidence, unlimited evidence into the ancient Vedic library. And I just pulled just a few, but we can go on this for 5 days if somebody likes them. So with that, back to you.
Oh, Nilesh, you are just wonderful. But I'm, the more we hear it, the more we understand it. And I know Nilesh uses a lot of Sanskrit words with his beautiful accent that we should learn how to pronounce these words properly. And I know it's difficult for some of the new students, but keep at it. It's so important to keep this sound vibration constantly coming into you. And as the years go by and time goes by, it'll seem like one of those nano minutes. And one of these days you'll get it. We'll all get it. So Nilesh, that was just stunning. It really was. It was a beautiful way to put it. Einstein, Jeffrey tells the story of Einstein's as well. Jeffrey, you must have something to say on that. That was just brilliant.
Yata pinde tata brahmande. It was a brief but brilliant tour of the macrocosm and the microcosm. And what's so remarkable about the Vedic Vidya is that all of those are an elevator, and you can stop at any floor and shop there and see what's there. And it doesn't negate all the other floors. We're used to this. If it's a tall, tall building, if it's a skyscraper, it has multiple dimensions and multiple things to be seen. So when a sadhu like Nilesh opens up this Vedic Vidya and starts to show some of its secrets, we have a vision of a culture that is so brilliant. We don't have another historical example of this from any civilization. And this to me is what I call the Vedic Renaissance right now. People like Nilesh are bringing this forward. The gurus who came to me and gave me an opportunity to participate in this, and Sandy, all of us who are active participants in this right now, feel this excitement of revelation and the stimulation and beauty that that brings with it. And with that, except for a little chanting if you want before we're done, Sandy, I'll give it back to you and a last word from Nilesh as well.
Well, I'd like to thank Nilesh very much and Jeffrey G for hosting this conversation. I know our students have benefited immensely by this, and Nilesh, we'd love to have you back again. Next week for our students, I think Jeffrey will go verse by verse into 18 and we'll complete that chapter 18. I don't know, it might take 2 more classes. He's kind of enjoying expanding on it. So thank you, Nilesh. Thank you, Jeffrey G, so much. Jeffrey, you want to do final blessing, or shall we have Nilesh go first?
Nilesh, go first, and then I'll just chant one thing or another.
Yeah, I would prefer that. I would just go first, and Jeffrey concludes it on the beautiful prayer. I don't want to disturb that atmosphere after Jeffrey does that. So I don't have anything to add. Some people are putting some comments there. Thank you very much. If you want to know more, you can always go to read my books, of course, read my blogs, listen to my talks. But just the kind of dynamics that I saw here, I would also add a word of caution that do have that discussion. And I don't know what opportunities you have, but have that discussion before you do that too much of it with, for example, Jeffrey. Okay. For your specific situation, he may have advice as to what you may want to watch, what you may not want to watch, even from all the talks that I have. What is very important is that you don't turn this into confusion for you. That doesn't really help. If you know a little, but you know this very well. In fact, people ask me now, hey, you have done Mahabharata, Ramayana, now what? And I say, what do you mean, now what? I have Ramayana and Mahabharata to last for multiple lifetimes. If I want to research into it, it will never be over. So it's very important to focus on something. So I would encourage you to do that, but I would encourage you. And so I said, I wrote the comment there, do check with your guru. This is very important, so please do that. And with that, thank you, everyone. Back to you, Jeffrey G.
Thank you so much, Nilesh. And as you see in the beauty, sweetness, and profundity of conversations like this with Nilesh, that within this great culture, we become each other's gurus and sadhus. And when he's speaking, and I love him for it, but I know he knows he's not speaking, he's passing on. And this is what sampradaya is. This is what a sadhu and a guru are doing. They're holding and passing on. And if you're hungry, they will feed you the most sublime nectar, the most sweet, juicy, delicious, wonderful reality. And then if you're careful and you learn it, you can chew on it again and again. So the mantra that I want to end with is a series of names of Bhagavan. And it is a beautiful example of, you could call it a sublime Vedic tasting party. It's the many flavors made into a beautiful dish. And so some sadhu, some rishi created this dish by poetically bringing these words together. And the last bit of Sanskrit in what I'm about to chant for you says, Mam trahi samsara bhujangadashtam. It says, I'm trapped in the coils of a serpent called samsara, or repeated birth and death. Please remove that constraining force. Please give me moksha so that I can fully experience your beauty and reality. And so the mantra goes like this. And it is not a great opera star or someone who's a perfect singer. It is someone who, in spite of not being that, sings from their heart. There is no qualification for this other than your deepest sincerity. And so here we go. Om Shri Ram Narayana Vasudeva Govinda Vaikuntha Mukunda Krishna Shri Keshava Ananta Nashringa Vishnu Mam Trahi Samsara Bhujangadashtam. I don't want anything. Just please free me from this bondage that's twisted around me, and please allow me to resume my original identity and have a relationship with you. Om Shri Ram Narayana Vasudeva Govinda Vaikuntha Mukunda Krishna Shri Keshava Ananta Nashringa Vishnu Mam Trahi Samsara Bhujangadashtam. And back to Nilesh one more time. Nilesh, from your heart, what is all of this? What should we feel about it?
If I open my mouth, which I did now, then the feeling may go away. That's the fear. I think we should relish it. The Muktikopanishad says, just focus on Om. And for us, it is Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So you find the Vasudevaya in the previous chapter, Vasudevam Sarvam Iti. And then in 15th chapter, you say Purushottamaya. So Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Purushottamaya. Vasudevaya makes it 12 Akshari mantra. If you add Purushottamaya, it makes it 18. So our choice. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sandy?
Good night, everybody. It's been a pleasure having you all with us today. We'll see you next Wednesday. Go to Nilesh. I put his link in there to get his books, read his, view his videos. There's lots of them. He has a discussion group that you can be a part of, and Jeffrey Armstrong YouTube as well. Lots of videos there for you. So it's been a wonderful evening. Thank you so much, everybody. Nilesh, namaste. Thank you. Jeffrey G, Jai Guru G. Parker and Ethan, thanks for being our video. Thanks for helping everybody else. We love you. Good night.